What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, it's Monday. You know what time it is. It's time to go over the top waiver ads as we head into week 9. At this point in the season, we should all be preparing for the playoffs. It's very important that the moves we make now are calculated and all towards that goal. I will say, however, right off the bat that this really isn't a good week for waivers. If you do have a high claim priority or a lot of fab, I would suggest that you save some of it. But if you're wondering exactly what amount of fab we would spend or what priority we would spend on each player, make sure you go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Our complete waiver information is on there. Obviously, with news coming out each and every day, certain pieces of information could alter exactly what we would spend on each player. So for updated information, check there. Members of our site also gain access to the weekly rankings, trade model, sports betting picks, DFS picks, and more. So once again, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link for that in the description box below. Before we do jump into the video though, stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was which tight end currently has the highest percentage of their team's air yards. The correct answer was Mark Andrews. Andreas Kreishammer, you got this one right. As for today's stat of the day, which quarterback currently has had the most time to throw? Once again, that's which QB has had the most time to throw. Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. With that out of the way though, let's hop right into the running backs. As you can see, leading this list, we have Zack Moss, a player we've been pretty high on throughout the offseason. Unfortunately for him, he had been dealing with injuries for the first half of the season. It seems as though at this point, he is pretty healthy. Devin Singletary, though, I will add, has looked pretty good, much better than we had expected so far this season. He's remained healthy, and as it stands today, it looks as if these backs are going to be splitting carries for the time being. Zack Moss, though, has established himself as the better scoring option, so when it comes to red zone opportunities, those are more than likely going to shift more in favor of Zack Moss than that of Devin Singletary. The Buffalo Bills offense overall, it has slowed down from what we saw at the beginning part of the year, so scoring opportunities may not be as frequent as they were back then, but regardless, it is a valuable role if you need a spot start, if you have some bye week issues. Zack Moss on your bench is definitely a player you could sub in and expect some solid results. He is currently owned in about 36% of leagues, so not available for everyone out there, but if you see him on your waivers, definitely worth an add. Behind him, we have Damien Harris, owned in 30% of leagues. He is the clear lead back in the New England offense, an offense that has also been struggling as of late, but still, a lead back in any offense in the NFL should be rostered in all leagues. Keep in mind though, his work in the receiving game is pretty limited. Whenever we have a running back who has limited work in that area, the floor for them on a weekly basis, it's going to be much lower. If they don't score, if they are struggling with their efficiency, they could have a game even with 16 carries that results in maybe 5 or 6 points. Behind Damien Harris, we have Gus Edwards, a similar situation with him, a running back who doesn't have a lot of work in the passing game. However, there is a big difference here. The Baltimore Ravens offense, it is going to have many more scoring opportunities than that of New England. We have now seen Gus Edwards in back-to-back games score a rushing touchdown. He had 14 carries in week 6. After the bye in week 7 against Pittsburgh this week, 16 carries, 87 yards, and a rushing touchdown as well. Clearly, he is the preferred option in the run game. I don't see that changing unless Mark Ingram comes back, or at least not anytime soon. There could potentially be that shift to J.K. Dobbins, but as long as Gus Edwards is playing well, and throughout his career he has, it's ultimately going to be his job to lose. He's only owned in about 4% of leagues, so virtually all of you out there can get him. So if you are struggling at running back, Gus Edwards, definitely a player you should consider. The next player we have is Nyheim Hines. This is a name that we had brought up in waivers earlier on in the season. He has a defined role in the pass game in this offense, an offense led by Phillip Rivers. Historically loves passing the ball to the running back position. We saw him have a really big day this week. On the ground, not so impressive. 5 rushes, 8 yards. That was never the bread and butter for him anyways. His skill set definitely more weighted in the receiving game. In this week, 3 receptions, 54 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. touchdowns. He now has 26 total receptions through 7 games this season, which means if you put him in your lineup and you start him, his floor, it's going to be relatively high. Just keep in mind the way that this offense is working and the backfield with who's getting the touches. Week to week, it's looking like it's not a guarantee. Next week, they do face Baltimore. I could see this being a potential Nyheim Hines game. However, putting a player in who's coming off of 8 touches, regardless of what the outcome is, it's always going to bring in some risk. The next player we have is DeeJay Dallas. In this week's matchup, he did play the lead back role on this offense. As we know, Chris Carson did get injured the week before that. This left presumably Carlos Hyde to take lead back duties, but once again, Carlos Hyde, in the game that they needed him most to play that lead back role, he found himself also missing this game. He was ruled out. DeeJay Dallas, he was the lead back. He performed well in a result standpoint. As for an efficiency standpoint, not so much. We have 18 carries, 41 yards at 2.3 yards per carry. In the receiving game, his efficiency no better. 5 receptions, 17 yards. He did score both on the ground and through the air though, so that did make up for the lack of efficiency when it comes to the fantasy points, but he didn't show us really anything on the field that would suggest he's a threat to continue to get touches as long as the other backs are healthy. That's the reason he doesn't make it higher in this list. And Chris Carson, he's an animal. I wouldn't be surprised if he's back as early as next week. The final running back we have is Jordan Wilkins of the Indianapolis Colts, and I believe this is a player that is going to be very high on some people's waiver priority, also low on others. It's really going to be where you draw the line in the sand on where you see Jonathan Taylor's involvement moving forward. The coaching staff did come out and say that they wanted to take a hot hand approach. Jonathan Taylor struggling a bit. Jordan Wilkins did have himself quite the day. 20 carries, 89 yards. That's a 4.5 yards per carry average. He did score on the ground. Also, his 1 reception, it did go for 24 yards. So in his limited opportunity, he really did perform. I am currently taking the stance that Jonathan Taylor is going to bounce back, and that will be at the detriment of Jordan Wilkins. I wouldn't trust starting him next week because of this, especially against Baltimore. So for that reason, I do have him ranked very low, but I understand why others would rank him very high. Alright guys, we're moving over to the wide receivers. There are a lot of receivers on this list that are much lower percentage owned, so for those of you out there that are concerned you may not have them available to you, a lot of guys on this list, they are available out there. To start, we have Corey Davis. Corey Davis is the highest percentage owned player, coming in at 36% ownership, but at this point he really needs to be owned in all leagues. I can't stress that enough. There has not been one single week where if he's healthy and on the field you would have been disappointed with the production that he gave you by starting him, and he has now scored a touchdown in back-to-back games, has had 10 targets in back-to-back games as well, and has reached pay dirt in 3 of his 5 healthy games. His upcoming schedule, it does get quite a bit rough though, so be mindful of that. He faces Chicago in week 9, not a all that scary matchup, but in week 10 he has Indianapolis followed by Baltimore, then after Baltimore faces Indianapolis once again. His playoff schedule though, not as scary. Jacksonville, Detroit, Green Bay. So if you do add him, he definitely is a player you could rely on down the stretch. Behind him, Darnell Mooney. Mooney has been a player who's been trending upward in this offense. Against New Orleans though, he had his best fantasy day of the season. 5 receptions, 69 yards, even catching a touchdown as well. Keep in mind this was only on 6 total targets, the 3rd highest amount of targets he's received in a single game this season. So when starting him, the variance, it is going to be high, but if you do want a player who has a defined role in their offense, the chance to perform in a positive matchup, Darnell Mooney, he does bring that to the table. The next player we have is Josh Reynolds of the LA Rams. This is another player whose involvement has also been increasing as of late. The upside for him is not going to be all that high unless there's an injury to Robert Woods or Cooper Kupp, 2 players who have been relatively healthy, but we do have to recognize his targets, they've been up there. 8 targets in week 7, followed that up with 9 targets in week 8. Despite not scoring this week against Miami, he had had reached pay dirt in both week 6 and week 7, so you know that they are looking for him at that side of the field. Starting him, of course, it would be risky, but week 10, the first game they have back from the bye, they do face Seattle. I definitely think this is a matchup where you could consider putting him in the flex if you are a player in a desperate situation. As we know, Seattle, they really give it up to wide receivers. So for a wide receiver who's third in the pecking order for targets, it wouldn't be uncommon whatsoever for him to have a solid performance. The next player we have Jakobi Meyers of the New England Patriots. With Julian Edelman on IR and N'Keal Harry also battling injuries himself, this completely leaves open the leading receiver role for this offense. Jakobi Meyers, as it seems, is going to be playing in that role. He received double-digit targets this past week. He converted that into 6 receptions for 58 yards. No, not a performance to blow you out of the water by any means, but still, anytime you have a leading receiver in any offense, the chance of them having a good game, it's always going to be out there. Next week, they face the New York Jets. The New York Jets pass defense is not a defense we should be worried about. Jakobi Meyers definitely has the opportunity to produce in that game. So if you're a team desperate for a receiver, Jakobi Meyers could be your guy. The next player we have and final wide receiver on this list is going to be Marvin Hall of the Detroit Lions. For those of you that did not know, Kenny Golladay forced out of the contest. He is dealing with a hip injury. At this point, we're not sure the severity of it, whether it will keep him out for an extended period of time or whether he will be playing next week. If he is going to be playing next week, Marvin Hall, not a name you should really consider. However, it is worth noting he received 7 targets on Sunday. 7 targets did tie Marvin Jones, and Marvin Jones, he's owned in virtually all leagues, so the only opportunity to take advantage of an increased target market share in this offense due to Kenny Golladay being out is likely going to be in the form of Marvin Hall. His 7 targets resulted in 4 receptions, 113 yards for a massive 28.3 yards per reception. No, he didn't score, but clearly he showed his chops as a deep receiving threat. We're going to be moving over to the tight ends though. There really aren't many options this week, but there are some good ones. To start, Dallas Goedert. Goedert was activated off of IR this week. They did have him available for the game against Dallas. However, they really didn't need to use him. He only put together 1 reception on 1 target for 15 yards. Their mindset, clearly they would only want to use him if the game was really getting out of hand or it was close, because clearly he's one of their best offensive playmakers, but coming back from injury, there's always risk in forcing him out there. Heading into week 9, they have a bye week for him to begin to get more healthy, so week 10 and on, he's likely going to be a top 10 tight end for the rest of the season. He is owned in about 40% of leagues, so I don't believe all of you out there will have an opportunity to get him off of waivers, but if you check and he is there, or somebody who sees his 1 reception and potentially drops him this week due to the bye week, try to get him off the waivers because it's likely that move will pay dividends for you down the stretch. The next tight end we have is Trey Burton of the Indianapolis Colts, currently only owned in 9% of leagues. He clearly is the top option at tight end for that team, a team led by Phillip Rivers. Historically loves getting his tight ends involved, especially around the goal line. And once again, Trey Burton, he did reach pay dirt, not in the area you would expect. He had a rushing touchdown, his 2nd rushing touchdown in 2 straight games. Is this something we could continue to see? Definitely. We really don't see tight ends utilized in this fashion all that often or that frequently, but it's had success. Definitely something they know they can bring out. And with Burton scoring 3 times in 2 games, he's certainly a player for teams desperate at the tight end position that you could put in and feel confident doing so each week. The final tight end we have is Jordan Reed of the San Francisco 49ers. For those of you who may be unaware, George Kittle, he did suffer a foot injury. Early indications of an x-ray did come back negative though, so the extent of the amount of time that George Kittle will be out, it's unknown. We can't say for certain he will miss next game, but the severity of the injury requiring an x-ray does indicate it may be a few weeks. If that is the case, Jordan Reed, who is currently on IR, he could find himself returning and stepping into a major role. The coaching staff has already come out and said that he is trending towards being activated for week 9. That would line up perfectly for filling that vacated role of George Kittle, and we've seen him do this in the past. In week 2, after the initial George Kittle injury this season, Jordan Reed stepped in, received 8 targets, converted that into 7 receptions for 50 yards, and in that same game scored 2 receiving touchdowns. That's the type of upside he will bring to the table if he is the starter, and we already know it's a role in this offense with very heavy usage. But guys, that's gonna do it for the waivers this week. If you did enjoy, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.